This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. I'm a big fan of shave soap. I've been using different brands for years, and I recently gave Sterling's shave soaps a try, and I've been very happy with the results. Sterling's shave soaps give you a great lather and a frictionless feel that allows the razor to glide right over the skin for a super close shave. No skin irritation and a clean, refreshing feel with no soapy residue after. I can tell you without a doubt, it's simply the best shave I've ever had. And my wife has noticed too. And here's the thing. With the ability to purchase 1-ounce sample pucks, you can try out different scents to find the right one for you. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. This day in sports history. It's November 29th, and on this day in 1934, it was the start of a tradition that we enjoyed just yesterday. On this day in 1934, it was the first Thanksgiving Day game for the NFL and the Detroit Lions. George Richards was a radio executive who purchased the Portsmouth Spartans and then moved the team to Detroit for the 1934 season. Major League Baseball was well established by this point. The NFL, though, was still grappling a little bit with its identity. College football was much more popular. It drew more people, and not every great college player even went pro. But Richards knew a few things about promotion, and one of his big ideas was to have his team play a game on Thanksgiving. There was a concern about whether people would give up part of their Thanksgiving Day and come out to watch a professional football game, especially the new guys in town. Well, that question was answered pretty quickly. 26,000 tickets were sold more than 2 weeks before the game, with many more wanting tickets to the game against the champion Chicago Bears on this day. Estimates of fan interest said if the University of Detroit Stadium was big enough, another 25 or 30,000 tickets could have been sold. When the game rolled around, it did not hurt that this turned out to be a pretty darn good game. In fact, an instant classic. The Bears were a perfect 11-0 coming into this one. The Lions had lost just one game that season. Detroit scored a couple of first-half touchdowns and added a field goal to take a 16-7 lead at the half. The Bears' defense tightened up in the second half and got a couple of field goals in the third quarter to trim the lead to 3. When the Bears' Joe Zeller picked off a Lions pass and returned it to the 4-yard line, it set up the game-winning score. Bronco Nagurski found Bill Hewitt in the end zone for the game winner. The Bears won 19-16. 4 days later, these same two teams played again, and the Bears won again, 10-7 in that one to wrap up their second straight NFL championship. Another first from this day that helped make this an annual event was the presence of NBC Radio. Richards and NBC set up a 94-station network to broadcast the game across the country. It was the first time a football game was broadcast nationally. These two teams met on Thanksgiving Day the next year, with Detroit getting a little bit of revenge in 1935. With the exception of the war years 1939 through 1945, the Detroit Lions have played at home on Thanksgiving since this day in 1934. On this day in 1992, New York Jets defensive lineman Dennis Byrd was paralyzed during a game. It had already been a tough season for the Jets. They were 3-8 coming into this one against Kansas City. They lost defensive star Jeff Lageman in the first game of the year. Receiver Al Toon had suffered his 9th concussion of his career, and he retired. The Chiefs were leading 6-0 in the third quarter. They had the football, and on a second down play, Chiefs quarterback Dave Craig was looking downfield, but the pocket was closing in fast. Dennis Byrd from the right, Scott Mesereau from the left. Craig sensed the pressure like a veteran QB would, and he stepped up in the pocket. Byrd got a hand on the football and stripped it away from Craig, and then he crashed headfirst into the sternum of Mesereau. The Chiefs recovered the loose ball, guys diving on it with little consideration for their body to claim possession of it. Back at the point of the strip, though, Byrd lay on his back, looking up at the New Jersey sky. Linebacker Kyle Clifton looked down at him and said, "Hey, get up, Dennis." Byrd replied, "I don't think I can, Kyle. I think I'm paralyzed." It wasn't known at the time, but it would become evident later on at Lenox Hill Hospital that he'd shattered his fifth cervical vertebra into hundreds of pieces. In the immediate aftermath, the only part of his body below the neck he could move was his right bicep. The prognosis was not good. After a 4-hour surgery to stabilize his neck and stop the swelling, he was told he would be a quadriplegic for the remainder of his life. But Byrd never gave up hope, and he never stopped fighting. He kept his faith and his determination, and just 3 months later, he took his first steps. He continued to rehab the injury to the point he could walk without assistance, and then on opening day of the 1993 season, he walked to midfield with his wife and kids for the coin toss. His sheer will and determination and his spirit became an inspiration to not only his Jets teammates, but also to anyone who suffered a spinal cord injury. He received the inaugural Most Inspirational Athlete trophy in 1993 that became an annual award for the Jets. He co-authored his autobiography titled Rise and Walk: The Trial and Triumph of Dennis Byrd. That was turned into a made-for-television movie, Rise and Walk: The Dennis Byrd Story, that debuted in 1994. Sadly, though, Byrd was killed in a car accident in 2016 in Oklahoma. He was 50 years old. Let's talk a little college basketball, since that season got underway this month, and with the crossover of college football and basketball, a lot of these early season matchups get glossed over, largely because, a lot of these matchups fall into the cupcake category. Teams looking for the runt of the litter to pick on and snag an easy win. And that's what this one turned out to be on this day back in 1989, when Oklahoma welcomed Alliant International University out of San Diego to Norman. It was the season opener for the Sooners, who had high hopes for the year, and they started the season ranked number 17 in the country. Alliant, actually they were known as U.S. International back then, and they were a Division I team that had played a couple of games so far and had actually beaten Drake out of the Missouri Valley Conference prior to this one. The Sooners put on a show in the first half, putting up an NCAA record 97 points on the scoreboard in the first half. That still stands as the D1 versus D1 matchup record. The Gulls did not make a miraculous comeback in the second. In fact, they barely covered Oklahoma's first half number. When the final horn sounded, Oklahoma wound up with the 173-101 win. The Sooners would go on to finish the regular season ranked as the number 1 team heading into the NCAA tournament before a second-round loss to North Carolina derailed their national championship dreams. Alliant/U.S. International would add their name to the NCAA record book later in the year in a 186-150 loss to Loyola Marymount. Their 150 points in that game is still the mark for most points scored by a losing team. Sadly, Alliant shuttered all its athletic programs back in 2006. Are you a hockey fan? Then you'll love Eric Zweig's new book, Hockey Hall of Fame: True Stories 2. It's a treasure trove of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave even the most devoted puckhead astounded. The intense rivalries, epic showdowns, and historic clashes that shaped the NHL's early years, it's all in there. Zweig uncovers the true stories that helped shape the sport, ensuring that you will never look at hockey the same way again. Check out Hockey Hall of Fame: True Stories 2 on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. On this day in 1972, the video game Pong was released. Compared to games today, compared to games in the 1990s, Pong was a bit basic. Graphically, it was a rectangle on each end that you moved up and down with a paddle controller to hit a square ball, if a ball can be square, with the idea to hit it past your opponent's rectangle like you would if you were playing a real-life game of ping pong. It was the first commercially successful video game, though, and it was extremely popular. You could find it in arcades, and it was soon made available for home play with a console connected to the UHF connectors on your TV. There are those who point to a 1958 video game called Tennis for Two, which was played on an oscilloscope, as the true original video game, but it wasn't something that was commercially successful or really commercially available. Now, if Pong had not been as popular as it turned out to be, who knows if Atari, PlayStation, or Xbox would exist, or even how different things may have actually been. Time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. In 1503, Michelangelo hid from the Pope inside the walls of the Medici Chapel. The Pope was taking harsh measures against the artist's fellow Florentines, and he thought he was on the Pope's death list. He spent 3 months inside the chapel, doodling on the walls until it was safe to emerge, and he and the Pope were cool again. The passage where Michelangelo hung out and doodled is occasionally opened up for tourists to see. And that, my friend, is 366 consecutive days of this day in sports history. I started this podcast on November 30th of last year with the hope that I could make it through the entire year and not miss a day. I put a lot of time and effort into bringing you a little sports history each and every day, and I hope you've enjoyed the journey with me. So, here I am. I've come full circle. What's next? Well, I'll keep going for another loop, hopefully. I started out with the idea that this would be a 2 to 3 minute podcast, and it's morphed into anywhere between 8 and 15 minutes. There are a lot more stories to tell, so who knows what the next 12 months will bring. But one promise I can make right now is that I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.